Good day everyone, I am Cheska Canyafego from BS NAD 3J2 and our topic is the students who are deaf and hard of hearing. So let's talk about it. What is deaf and hard of hearing? It is defined as an inability to hear normally. So people with normal hearing can hear sounds of low intensity. And the hearing loss can affect the entire sound spectrum of the ear or even the certain parts of it. So it can cause deafness or hard of hearing. Deaf, it is used for people with profound hearing loss. So when we say profound hearing loss, it is loss of 91 plus decibels. When we say decibels, it is the degree of loudness. So that person having 91 plus decibels is makonsider na jud siya as deaf. Next is hard of hearing. It indicates moderate to severe hearing loss. Moderate from loss of 41 to 70 decibels. It is called a moderate. To severe, the severe is 71 to 91 decibels. According to the World Health Organization in 2015, deafness and hearing loss can be caused by hereditary and non-hereditary genetic factors or by complications during pregnancy or childbirth. So, when we say hereditary, it is transmitted by the parents. So, kaan ka nang sabi, kaliwatan na nila nga naiingon ana, so mapasa jud sa anak or sa bata. Or maybe complications during birth or pregnancy. So, ma-accident ba ron, makakos na siya og deafness or hard of hearing kung asa man maigo sa parts sa imong brain or sa imong body. Additionally, infectious diseases such as meningitis, measles, mumps, and chronic ontological infections can cause hearing loss. The use of toxic medication, including antibiotics and antimalarial medications, can damage the inner ear at any age, including during pregnancy. So also kanang head trauma or an ear injury can cause hearing loss also. The noise-related trauma, such as the occupational use of noisy machinery, exposure to loud music, or other noises such as gunshots or explosions, can damage the inner ear and it will lead to hearing impairment. People who have a hearing loss are either prelingually deafened or postlingually deafened. So when we say prelingually deafened, they lost their hearing before they acquired knowledge. So pasabot, they already are deaf from birth or from a time of their infancy before sa ilahang development on their ability to speak. While ang postlingually deafened, they acquired their hearing loss after they acquired language. So, they already developed their speech and language skills and they acquired hearing loss after. So, for example, ana is naka-encounter ba ron sila og accident. So, mauna na naka-affect sa iyahang brain baron, so naapektuhan iyang ear, so naka-cause of hearing loss sa usa ka person. Some people who are prelingually deafened receive a cochlear implants early at birth. Some rely on spoken language. Many communicate with a combination of spoken language and sign language. Some may have issues with literacy. So lain-lain sila og mga capability, lain-lain og mga situation sa having a hearing loss or deafness. So for example, ana is kanang na you have a hearing loss, then wala jud kay nahibaw-an on how to communicate sa imuhang mga community. So you are not literate enough. So mo na ang pinakalisud jud kay kanang wala jud kay nahibaw-an or wala nimo na eskwelahan. So that's why na ay school para nila, na para mo help nila to build their confidence to communicate other people. People who have a postlingual hearing loss later in life, they may or may not benefit for listening devices. Some may learn sign language as a means to diversify access to communication. So kaning mga postlingual hearing loss, mag-learn na lang sila og sign language para maka-communicate sila sa ilahang community or sa ilang mga members of the family, so that makahibaw sila on how to communicate, kay wala man sila nakaagian na kung ano man siya kanang ni occur siya gradually or kalit-kalit lang siya nga nahitabo, o sila kahibaw nga naingon ana sila. So they need to learn sign language. Each learner with a hearing loss should be assessed individually, and accommodations should be implemented based on the unique needs of each student. So for further discussion, let's listen to Sarah May Carolasan to discuss about the prevalence of deaf and hard of hearing.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kimberly Kapangpangan. Our topic is about students who are deaf and hard of hearing. And today, let's talk about the prevalence of students who are deaf and hard of hearing. So in the Philippines, 1.23% of the entire population is either deaf, mute, or hearing impaired. As of 2009, the projected deaf population is already at 241,624 for those who are totally deaf. And I've searched some sources from Asia Pacific Journal of Public Health. It is a national survey of hearing loss in the Philippines, which have participants in the present study comprised 2,275 adults and children with pure tone hearing assessment results. So their study aimed to estimate the prevalence of hearing loss in the Philippines using a nationally representative sample. So a prevalence of moderate or worse hearing loss was 7.5 in children, 14.7% in adults between 18 and 65 years, and 49.1% in adults aged 65 years or older. So prevalence of wax occlusion and outer and middle ear disease was 12.2% and 14.2% respectively. Prevalence of hearing loss, outer and middle ear disease appear comparatively high in the Philippines when compared with rates reported in high-income countries. Higher proportions of severe to profound hearing loss were also identified, so indicating that there is both an increased prevalence and severity of hearing loss in this population. And based on College Guide for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Students by staff writers and it was published on October 27, 2020, it stated that 9 million people in the US are either functionally deaf or hard of hearing. Of these, about 100,000 are aged 18 to 44. So, but how many attend college? So the National Center for Educational Statistics reports somewhere around 20,000 deaf and hard of hearing students attend post-secondary educational institutions each year. So that's all for my report. Thank you for listening. So and next, let's talk about the independent living of students who are deaf and hard of hearing. Independent living covers a broad range of skills and needs related to adult living, from housing and skills at home to participating in and accessing community resources. So the three areas are home living, community participation, and recreation or leisure together comprise the larger transition area. So for deaf and hard of hearing students, first is the additional considerations in the area of independent living should be made as related to accommodations as well as health care related to the hearing loss. Next is the considerations for independent living include housing arrangements for students in the future, whether this be on their own, in an apartment, living with parents, or in a supported housing arrangement. All skills related to life at home also fall within this area, like planning and preparing meals, grocery shopping, paying bills, budgeting, and managing money. And of course, the laundry, it includes cleaning also and basic home care. Next is evaluating and planning for needs related to community participation is also important. How will the student get around in the community? So, does the student know how to access important community resources? So, this would be include the grocery store, doctor or dentist office, ENT or audiologist, ENT or audiologist, post office, and a variety of other necessary places. IEP teams should consider whether or not development of goals and objectives related to social skills are necessary for deaf and hard of hearing students. This could include development of social skills, forming friendships, developing healthy relationships, involvement with deaf and hard of hearing groups or organizations, and use of social media and other goals aimed at helping students maintain connection with others and to avoid social isolation. And also, it is also important for the IEP team to evaluate and consider if the student has needs related to time management and self-direction. So, example of this, can the student make and keep his or her own appointments? Does the student use a calendar or date book to keep track of appointments and schedules? So for deaf and hard of hearing students, this also includes carrying a pen and paper for writing notes, as well as the carrying the orange or yellow deaf and hard of hearing identification card. So independent living if you are deaf or hearing impaired. A great deal of equipment and other support services are available to help deaf or hearing impaired people live independently and safely in their own homes and to enjoy improved quality of life. So the devices available include TV amplifiers, specially adapted telephones, text phones, special listening and alerting devices such as specially adapted doorbells, alarm clocks, and smoke alarms. So such equipment can help many hearing impaired people manage a range of everyday situations. So many people also benefit from the use of induction loops, which work with a T or telecoil setting which can be found on most hearing aids. So most public places such as banks, post offices, and churches have induction loops and there should be a sign to indicate where the induction loop has been fitted. And you can seek advice about such devices from your local council such services department, National Health Service, audiology departments, and a wide range of voluntary organizations. These devices can also be purchased from many Amplifon and other private hearing centers. So if you're deaf or hearing impaired, you are entitled to request a health and social care assessment by your local social services department. So this assessment will examine your individual needs so that the right support or equipment can be provided. And lastly, I included this act which is the Equality Act 2010. It requires all employers and providers of goods and services to the public to make reasonable adjustments to assist disabled people. So for hearing impaired people, reasonable adjustments might include providing communication aids or services such as an interpreter. So the Equality Act 2010 includes provisions that ban age discrimination against adults in the provision of services and public functions, and to protect the rights of individuals and advance equality of opportunity for all. So that's all for my report. Thank you for listening.
Good day everyone, I am Sarami Carlasan and my assigned topic will be the learning and behavior of deaf and hard hearing. So first is encourage students with hearing loss to set themselves toward the front of the lecture theatre where they will have any unobstructed line of vision. This is particularly important if students is using an interpreter lip reading, relying on visual clues, or using a hearing aid which has limited range. Be aware that some students may not be comfortable with these suggestions or have alternate strategies. Respect their choices. Use assistive listening devices such as induction loops or if these are available in the lecture theatre. Hearing aids may include transmitter receiver system with a clip-on microphone for a lecturer. If using such microphone, it is not necessary to change your speaking or teaching style. Ensure that any background noise is minimized so that it can avoid distraction for the student. Repeat clearly any questions asked by the students in the lecture or class before giving a response. Next is do not speak when facing the blackboard. Be aware that most touches, birds, hands, books, and microphones in front of your face can add to the difficulties of lip readers. Students who lip read cannot function in darkened rooms. You may need to adjust the lighting in your teaching environment. If a sign interpreter is employed, follow the hands for working with a sign interpreter. It is difficult for a student watching an interpreter to also take notes from overhead or blackboard. An interpreter is unavailable to translate concurrently both your words and any information given on an overhead. It is important, therefore, all information should also be available as handouts. Provide written materials to supplement all lecturers. Tutorials and laboratory sessions, announcements made regarding class times, activities, field work, industry visit, etc. should be given in written as well as verbally. Allow students to record lectures or preferably make available copies of your lecture notes. Flexible delivery of teaching materials via electronic media is also particularly helpful for students who have difficulty accessing information in the usual ways. For students with a hearing loss, new technology and internet in particular can be used to bridge many gaps. Ensure that list of subject-specific jargons and technical terms which students will need to acquire are made available early in the course. If interpreters or captioning are being used as an adjustment, make this list available to the professionals providing the service as early as possible. Any videos or films used should where possible be captioned. When this is not possible, you will need to consider alternative ways for students with hearing impairment to access the information. In tutorials, assess students who lip read by having the students sit directly opposite you and ensure, if possible, that they can see all other participants. Control the discussion so that the only one person is speaking at a time. Students with hearing loss, especially those with associated speech issues, may prefer to have another student present their tutorial papers. Language abilities are often affected by hearing loss, depending on the age of onset. Students who acquire their hearing loss early in life may have literacy issues. In some cases, providing reading lists well before the start of a course for students with hearing loss can be beneficial. Consider tailoring this reading list when necessary and provide guidance to the K-text. allow assignments or reviews to be completed on an in-depth study of a few texts rather than a broad study of meaning. Using Auslan interpreters and live remote captioning may require some adjustments in teaching styles, particularly the pace of the learning. Consult with the providers of the service early to identify the potential changes. Where live remote captioning is provided, a transcript of the session can usually be assessed within 24 hours. It is recommended that this be emailed directly to the students as an accurate record and reference. Next is the behavior of deaf and hard hearing. Inconsistent response. When the student didn't properly hear what did you say all about, he or she can hear different any words. Next is delay of language, speech development. Since the student cannot hear, that can cause delay of speech, but some of them cannot speak. Hearing loss can affect a child's development of speech and language skills. When a child has difficulty hearing, the areas of the brain used for communication may not develop appropriately. This makes understanding and talking very difficult. Next is the behavioral characteristic accompanying disabilities, difficulty following verbal directions, and difficulty with oral expression. Some difficulties with social, emotional, or interpersonal skills because the students cannot communicate properly because of his or her hearing impairment. Hearing loss treatment for children is better than it has ever been before. Technology improvement along with institutional changes are giving these kids more options for their hearing loss. Despite this advancement, children with hearing loss exhibit more aggression than their peers with normal hearing. Deaf children in general have higher rates of aggression, non-compliance, and inattention. Depression and other mental health problems are also high in children with hearing loss. Often have a degree of language delay, often follows and rarely leads. Usually exhibit some form of articulation difficulty, have problem making sounds and forming particular speech sounds properly. They may less so that S sounds like TH may not be able to produce a particular sounds. They can make the R sounds and say wabbit instead of rabbit. Next is can become easily frustrated if their needs are not met, which may lead to some behavioral difficulties. When their needs don't meet, the children has possible to tantrum. Next is sometimes the use of hearing aids leads to embarrassment and fear of rejection from peers because other people didn't know how useful it is. So that's why some of them they bully deaf and hard hearing students because of what device that they are using.
Hello everyone, I am Hannah Crucio and I will be discussing about the assessment for deaf and hard hearing students. So, it is important to highlight that competency in assessment with children who are deaf or who are hard of hearing involves much more than making adaptations to tests or choosing the right test. So, specialized training in hearing loss is important to understand the impact of hearing on development, provide the appropriate adaptations, interpret results, and make appropriate diagnosis and recommendations. So, when working in this population, it is also important to have an understanding of deaf culture and American Sign Language. When you are testing someone with mild or unilateral hearing loss, it is important to use a room without auditory distractions. Noises coming from the outside the room will make much more difficult for the child to hear. So, when talking with a child, face them so that they can use visual cues well, as well as oral cues. For example, look at your lips and facial expression. It is not necessary to sit to the side of a child with unilateral hearing loss. However, if you must sit to the side, sit on the side where they have better hearing. Talk in a normal speaking voice, being alert to keeping up a normal volume. Be sure to pronounce words very clearly, especially the last sound in the word, which can sometimes get dropped. This is especially important on a task like list learning, where you read a list of words aloud. It would be normal for someone with mild hearing loss to mishear similar words, for example, ice or ice. So that's all.
Placements that are adapted for children who are deaf or hard of hearing learners are usually somewhere in schools designed for regular education of children who are able to hear typically. So this means that we should consider the learners to be in an environment nga ma-experience bitaw nila of how to be normal despite of having such disabilities. So least restrictive environment placement for students in special education, in general speaking, placement in special education for a student starts with the idea that the student would attend the school that he or she would attend if special education were not a consideration. But the law emphasizes that LRE is not just a place, but also the setting in which the students will be in the least restrictive environment based on his individualized needs. So therefore, the IEP team shall consider the communication needs of the child. And in the case of a child who is deaf or hard of hearing, consider the child's language and communication needs. But the placement decision must be individually determined on the basis of each child's abilities and needs, and not solely on the factors such as category of disability, significance of disability, availability of special education and related services, configuration of the services delivery system, and other factors. So next is types of educational placements for deaf and hard of hearing children. So the first is deaf schools. So most deaf schools are BSL medium schools or British Sign Language. So some parents opt for deaf schools as they want a deaf culture and linguistic experience for their deaf child. Also deaf children with additional needs are often placed in deaf schools. So deaf schools can be day or residential. So it is very understandable nga some parents want their child nga maka-adapt dayon bitaw sa changes. So that's why some prefer this kind of placement. So the second one is mainstream. So resource mainstream school is where there are other deaf child. So though there may only be 1 or 2 per year group, and there is specialist staff on equipment. So the resource school may teach BSL and or provide the curriculum in BSL. Some resource schools only teach in English and do not teach BSL. So usually only profoundly deaf children may be offered this placement. So here in the Philippines, mostly ASL or FSL ang gamiton for deaf students. All children deserve an equal chance at education. That every child is granted a free appropriate public education by law. So therefore, the Individualized with Disabilities Education Act or IDEA ensures that all students who qualify for special education can receive the same quality of instruction and have access to the same instructional materials as their non-disabled peers. So in mainstreaming, it involves placing a student with a disability in a general education classroom with a special education teacher as the co-teacher or with an assistant who knows the child and can ensure that she or he is assessing all of the same instructional materials. So in the case of deaf or hard of hearing students, pwedeng na ay interpreter. So the third one is resource school. So some deaf children attend a set number of hours tuition at deaf schools or resource schools whilst attending their local or chosen non-resource mainstream schools. So this means nga pwede sila to have their own tutors in their homes aside from attending in a regular school. The supports and services for deaf and hard of hearing learners. So speech language pathologists, educational audiologists, and our teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing. So of course, they are the one who help the students to understand better in school. So resource teachers need to know that the needs of the children who are deaf or hard of hearing are often different than those with other special challenges. So amplification systems. It involves hearing aids or cochlear implant. Ang cochlear implant kay both external and surgical implanted portion for this hearing device. So services of an interpreter for those students who use sign language. So in order for them to understand sa teacher in general education, so mag-need gid sila og interpreter. So favorable seating in the class to facilitate lip reading. So dapat na gid sila sa atubangan para mabasa bitaw nila og tarong kung unsay gisulti sa teacher. So caption films or videos. With caption gid if na ay mga videos in order for them to understand better the video kay lahi ra gid kung action ra, although actions is okay but naaman gid kanang dili maklaro bitaw. So assistance of a note taker who take notes for the student with a hearing loss so that the student can fully attend to instructions. So instruction for the teacher and peers in alternate communication methods such as sign language and counseling. So refrain from speaking while writing on a chalkboard or while turned away from the student. So like if you speak, dapat focus ra gid ka sa imong students or para dili sila maglibog. The use of visual aids, so chalkboards, overhead projectors, diagrams, charts and etc. greatly as assistance students with hearing impairments. So allow extra time when referring to written materials since the student with hearing disability must look at the material and return his attention to the classroom to keep up with the discussions. Avoid covering your mouth or standing with a light source behind you when speaking for them to be able to clear kung unsa man yung panabi diha. So that's it. Thank you.